All of this we bring and lay before our guest, Stephen Yates, who is the foreign policy expert. Not a foreign policy expert, ladies and gentlemen. He's hated by communists. They didn't like him when he ran Radio Free Asia. He previously advised former Vice President Dick Cheney in the Bush White House. He's a hated man, valuable man, and he joins us now from his Minecraft bunker in an undisclosed location. Stephen Yates at YatesComs on Twitter. Always good to see you, my friend. So that is the big question, though. Sudan has a coup. They detained. They've arrested their prime minister. What does that do to the Abraham Accords? Because they were a signer on that. So that was like the only reason that we stopped designating them as a state sponsor of terror. What changes now?
Well, it is a big question about where things go in the sort of broader Middle East, where we've kind of had, I think, the inertia pulled somewhat in the right direction, despite the political transition in the United States. The Abraham Accords fundamentally were kind of driven by interest in the region themselves. The United Arab Emirates had a pretty profound impact on trying to get things over the finish line. And they were among the early ones to establish formal diplomatic relations with the state of Israel. It's conspicuous. There haven't really been any additions to that. It started out about a little over a year ago and had sort of a quick bam, bam, bam set of initial diplomatic relations established, and there's really been quiet since. And so if the Sudan happens to fall into disarray, a state of somewhat disappointing grace they've lived in for decades now, that could pull one of those parties back potentially. But no early signs that this instability in Sudan is driven by foreign policy. It's probably just driven by the same things that have pulled that poor country apart for too long.
Yeah, and I was looking at the timeline. I was reading a piece, I think this was Reuters actually, as to how this all happened. Because, I mean, I think after they had signed and they were no longer designated a terror state, they weren't really in, they didn't really get a lot of attention anymore. And I think that, I don't know if, I mean, I know that there are a lot of factors contributing to this, but it just seems like there's a lot of things falling apart. And Afghanistan continues to spiral. And another piece said that Afghanistan was near collapse. I would just think that the Taliban rolling through meant that it was collapsed. I mean, I don't know how much more collapse you can get. But how are the Abraham Accords going to fare through this administration? Because I do think that peace through strength and having strong leadership does stem off a lot of this stuff. Are they going to fall apart? I mean, for real, like how much longer are we going to have Abraham Accords now without a strong White House leader?
Well, I think it's difficult without a strong White House leader. At the same time, I think the other parties that have established normal diplomatic relations are pretty committed to keeping them going. There's been pretty substantial trade and investment increases between some of those Gulf partners and the state of Israel. There's been a couple of things that have remained kind of trilateral gatherings and announcements. The United States might be a somewhat passive participant in this at this point. I wish it were not so, because I think it was really fundamental to changing the frame through which we look at the future of the Middle East, not one driven by terrorist demands from the Palestinian territories or terrorist demands from the state sponsor we call Iran, but fundamentals of economic engagement, diplomatic recognition, and building peace through common prosperity was not really a new idea, but it was one that hadn't been tried in decades in the Middle East. And so that's important. I think there's still enough inertia to keep that going. We just don't want something like this to happen with more than one party. And we don't even really want it happening with the Sudan.
Yeah, they're very true. Talking with our friend Stephen Yates. You can follow him on Twitter at YatesComs. So China and Russia. Tokyo's very concerned over these drills that they've been carrying out. They've wrapped them up. They wrapped them up these last week. They've held the first joint patrol in the Western Pacific. They had a number of their vessels doing these joint maritime military exercises. So clearly, Russia and China are aligned, and they're making that very well known. Japan's very concerned about this, and yet still we're focusing on what was it? Let me pull this tweet up. I want to make sure I get it correct. National Gender Strategy, Stephen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the State Department did celebrate National Pronouns Day or something like that
Yes.
recently. So we're really high on top of global priorities and staring down dangerous adversaries by comma dealing with ourselves, for lack of a better way of putting it, on different days that we recognize in the international calendar. This is mostly theater when it comes to what Russia and China are doing, but it's a big theatrical middle finger at Japan, which is among the most peaceful of countries in the world. And is a threat to absolutely no one. Only the Chinese try to pretend as if Japan is a real problem or a threat. That's only projection on their part because they want to draw the white hot spotlight away from themselves as the real threat. These patrols were sort of in the north. If you thought that North Korea was going to have an outbreak and you wanted to try to hem them in, but what is the common foe that China and Russia were trying to deal with? There hasn't been some great Manchurian strategy to divide Russia and China and retake the motherland of Asia. So this is mostly theater, and it's one of those things where when they flex like this and we do nothing, it erodes the value of alliances. And that's really, really a disappointment, given that Japan has been kind of hosed when it came to the Olympics because of COVID, which came from China. And it kind of gets treated like an extra stepchild at the table when it comes to our global alliances, when it's a major economy and a truly responsible stakeholder.
Yeah, very much so. Talking with our friend Stephen Yates, and I mean, I know we did some naval drills with Japan. I think New Zealand had some participation in that, but that seemed more or less the way that I interpreted that. And correct me if I'm wrong. That was routine. That we've done that quite frequently. But this is the first time that we've seen such kind of exercises from Russia and China. Correct?
Right. And it is something that we do with other partners also. It's not something that in terms of practice is unprecedented by global partners around the world.
Right.
It's different when Russia and China do it. It's also different because when we do it, it's with our Japanese and Korean and other allies to send a signal to North Korea, which is a non-status quo power as Diplo speak goes, which means they're the threat. And so you're trying to do something to push back against a threatening party. When we have these patrols, say with British or others going through the Taiwan Strait, that's to brush back the People's Liberation Army, Navy, or Air Force of China, the People's Republic of China, because they are the non-status quo power that's trying to threaten people. But what is the point of them doing this? There's no threat emanating from anywhere against them militarily in that part of the world. So it's basically, as I say, theater, kind of absurd, but it's basically meant to deliberately insult people. And if you just let them do it, it just gets worse.
You've tweeted about some of the NBA stuff. Inez Cantor, who went after Xi Jinping, he got in some trouble. And the Chinese government saying Tibet belongs to the Tibetan people. China thinks everything belongs to it. And I love the language that they're trying to use to describe Taiwan, for instance, saying that they're secessionists and basically saying that they're like the Asian equivalent of the Confederacy, I guess, that doesn't make any sense. But you had tweeted this out as well. Inez Cantor he did a video. This takes some brass. He did a video, Dear Brutal Dictator Xi Jinping and the Chinese government. This guy doesn't play. Now he's getting punished for this. He's got, I mean, and he wore the t-shirt. He wears it. I mean, it's a great video. And now he's in trouble for it. Your thoughts?
He is, but he is sort of the light and righteous side of the pro sports kind of theater that we've had. He's the opposite of a Kaepernick taking a knee. He is someone who's actually standing up against oppression. This will hurt him financially. This will hurt him professionally, but he has a soul, he has integrity, he has eyes that see, and he has a mouth that speaks truth. All I can do is just salute and say thank you to someone who may be inconsequential when compared to King James when it comes to the business end of the NBA, but this guy has more flex than John Cena and King James combined. And I hope that everyone sort of looks at this guy and says, yeah, whatever happened to people who are privileged in life, like stars, speaking up for the little man, the oppressed, those who are victims of genocide? Good grief.
That moves, and putting this from, not to be very sterilized with my response, but to look at this from, a capitalist, merching this out kind of angle, because I know the NBA loves that. I mean, when I see stuff like this, because I don't follow NBA very much. I used to really like college basketball, and then I got very, very busy. But when I see stuff like this, I'm like, I would buy all of your shirts if I knew they weren't made by Uyghurs in the Xinjiang province.
Yeah.
I would totally buy all your merch. I would watch you. I would watch every game you played. I would be so into that, because that camaraderie, fellow Americans standing up and taking a standing. We used to have that, like back in the day when we had people like Marlene Dietrich and all of these other celebrities and everybody else that would take a stand, whether it was against Hitler or Nazis or fascism or whatever. And now it's like it's the opposite, and it's so rare to see these celebrities and these athletes do this, but that moves people. There's people love rallying around and being the underdog and fighting, and taking a stand against, stuff like this, but I wish that they would realize, Stephen, how much money they would make if they actually showcase that.
And it has the added virtue of being good and true.
Right.
It used to be on almost every college campus, and certainly around every polite Hollywood gathering, there would be some kind of free Tibet merch. There used to be a rainbow-like bumper sticker talking about Tibet, and probably 99 out of 100 Americans couldn't tell you what Tibet was, where it was, or anything, but they were for its freedom, of course.
Yeah.
And so there is actual profit to be made if people wanted to be sensible about it. But it actually, marketing the truth and the things that are good, that's fine. And it actually should be something that we build up positive momentum towards the things that are right, instead of being enslaved by having to compromise the words we use, the people we engage. I watched John Oliver do his rant about Taiwan. Some of it was good, but it's not necessarily the source we should be going to about historical truth or policy prescriptions, but he still talks about walking kind of namby-pamby around things because, the Chinese might want to fight us. Well, you know what? If we got wise about this, we're way bigger, stronger, and there's more of us in the world. It's we who should be putting pressure on China to play by our rules, and we just got to man up and do it.
Last quick question for you, though, but those hypersonic missiles.
Yeah. Well, my bet is if we want to do a Rocket Man versus Rocket Man comparison, that ours are bigger than theirs. And this really comes down to seriousness of purpose. We don't want war or conflict, but we should be making no bones about it, that we should be sowing division within China, that this is an irresponsible, racist, offensive government that does not have their best interests at heart, and a much better path is out there for the Chinese people if they move in the right direction. I think that's what the communist government fears most of all, and we should make them more afraid of it.
Yeah, that's why they have social media banned there unless they control it. Very interesting when you compare to what's trying to happen here. Stephen Yates, always so good to talk with you, my friend. I hope you have a great week. At YatesComms, go follow him on Twitter. He's got great insight. Stephen, as always, appreciate you. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Dana. Take care.
Of course, you too.